Welcome to the Hope Sports Podcast, where we chat each week with athletes about purpose. I'm your host, Olympic gold medalist Laura Wilkinson. Today, we have a really unique guest. A former elite distance runner himself, Dr. Ben Holtberg earned his PhD in psychology, and he has done some fascinating research about the effects of emotional health and identity on athletes. In our conversation, he unpacks the two different ways that we form our identities, what a healthy drive looks like, and how to move toward a more holistic mindset that will not only make us better athletes, but overall better people. Now listen up, because this one is power-packed. Dr. Ben Holtberg, thank you so much for being on the Hope Sports Podcast. We're excited you're here.
Thank you, Laura. It's great to be here.
Now, give us a little bit of a background, because I know you used to be an athlete as well. Tell me kind of how you got your start and what your experience was.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the heartland in Kansas, and sports had been a part of my life, I think, from the beginning, and throughout my kind of high school career, I ended up really excelling in track and field. So I was a middle distance and distance runner, mainly distance runner in high school, and I started to experience success and won some state championships in track and in cross country. Got a scholarship to college. I had several offers coming out of high school, and I chose to go to a school, a smaller school, a Division I school, and ran collegiately there. And there's where I really started running more of the 800 meters and qualified for NCAA championships a couple times. And then post collegiately, I got to run to U.S. indoor championships and run some on the circuit, and picked up a small sponsor and really enjoyed running. I think, as you know, there's a lot of athletes that probably feel this way, but I think it was a challenge for me. I had 8 stress fractures in my time from college to post collegiately. So there's always that balance of training hard, but being aware of this kind of propensity towards stress fractures. And so I couldn't really stay healthy long enough to keep going. And I was starting my PhD program at the time, and so I think it was 2007. I decided to stop running competitively and just go full tilt in the PhD program.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, so I mean, that had to be pretty frustrating, getting injured so frequently. I mean, was part of that frustration what has led you to be so interested in like the emotional health of elite athletes?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I remember my freshman year of college. I had just come from winning, being the top in the state, and I remember lining up on the line the first time as a collegiate athlete and looking at the program and seeing how many state champions were actually on the line. And there was so many of them. So you kind of go from that big fish in a small pond to now a whole new world. But I got injured that first year, and I really fell into a deep depression. It was a struggle for me. I had really built a lot of my sense of identity and worth and value around running, and so really had a pretty prosperous high school career without too many challenges. And so when I hit that first kind of wall of getting my first stress fracture, it was really hard for me. And so I was kind of a constant, like, getting injury, cross training, coming back, getting injured, cross training, coming back. And so I think that really became a part of my passion, was to help elite athletes deal with the obstacles and the emotional turmoil from being injured. Mm-hmm. And then I remember at the U.S. Open, actually, I had been training so well and was in really just fantastic shape, but had a lot of things going on in my life that were difficult at the time. And went to that meet, and I just blew up. I just didn't run well. I had really put a lot of time and energy into getting there, and I remember going back to the hotel room feeling completely alone and just sitting down in the shower and weeping and crying. And there was something about that just was so impactful for me, of like, I had put so much time, and I really felt like I was ready for a breakthrough race at that meet. And then the devastation I felt when I didn't perform. I didn't really know why. I think physically I was ready. And at that time I didn't know why, but the more that I've kind of studied this area and understood it more and more, I've been able to kind of look back at that time in my life and say, oh, I see how I was really pulling from my resources before the race even started, because of how anxious I was about not performing well. And so just that belief, and really the passion and purpose for me of helping athletes be able to compete with purpose and be emotionally healthy and perform well. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you've been researching along those lines. You're teaching about performance-based identity versus that purpose-based identity. Now, can you explain to us, like, what exactly is performance-based identity?
Yeah, so performance-based identity is really it's this putting, when athletes put their soul worth and value, or the main source of their worth and value, into how they perform in sports, it's usually accompanied by this fear of failure that is almost as if, now I'm not competing to even be my best, but I'm competing not to lose. And there's can tend to be this perfectionistic kind of concern or drive that I have to be perfect. That those three, fear of failure, this worth and value based on performance, and this kind of perfectionist concern, created, I found in my research, this self narrative, or this idea about the self that was really unhealthy for athletes emotionally, also contributed to poor performance, and crippled them after they had a disappointing performance. They had high levels of shame and guilt, and so this performance-based identity really can be something that's often celebrated, even sometimes by coaches, because this athlete might be the athlete that comes to practice every day. They're grinding, they're pushing, they're doing the extra things. Maybe even sometimes you have to slow them down. It might even be a coach who says, I wish I could bottle up what that athlete has and give it to everybody else. But the problem is there's a shadow side to that is unknown to a lot of people. And that's what I found, is that these athletes had the highest levels of depression and anxiety and weren't satisfied with life, and their relationships were not healthy. And they saw competition as a threat to themselves. They feared failing, and their mindsets were more of these kind of performance mindsets, not more of that kind of growth mindset. And so that's I think as I started to see this emerge in the data and all the work that I've been doing, the story became really clear to me that this might be a motivating, this might motivate athletes for a while and work for a while, like, because it does push them to want to get better, but it's not sustainable over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I heard you say in a talk that, like, it can be when they're anticipating that next competition and they have that performance-based kind of identity, that they can even physically experience what do you say, a physiological reaction, like they're being threatened by a dog or something. Can you kind of explain that? Like, it's not just in your head, like it comes out in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that what you said is really important. It's not just in your head. It's in your body. It's a physiological response. So the work that I started doing early on in my career was really around this idea of emotion regulation and how people manage emotional responses, especially kids from high-risk neighborhoods where they're exposed to violence on a regular basis. And physiologically, what happens when you're physically threatened is your sympathetic nervous system is activated to become aware, to become heightened of your surroundings, and it's adaptive, it's protective. But something like 1,100 different neuro and biophysiological chemicals are released and changes in the body are happening in a way that pulls and manages your resources just to manage that threat. So in other words, It's depleting you of resources just to manage that threat. And what's incredible is that our body can't tell the difference between an actual threat to your physical self and a threat to your social self. So when you put your worth and value in so much into how you perform, the very thought or anticipation of a competition can trigger that same sympathetic nervous system as if you're being threatened, that can deplete you before you ever get to the competition. And as you know, I mean, adrenaline is something that it can be helpful. It's facilitative for certain sports and in certain events, but in that sense of excitement that can come of just being ready for the competition, but it's not sustainable over time. Adrenaline cannot keep going, and so if you're starting that kind of those adrenaline spurts every time you think of a competition, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 week out, what you're doing is you're beginning to pull from your resources. So when the moment comes, it's going to be really hard to turn that on. You might feel flat. You might feel tired, even though you've tapered or you've trained well and you're ready for that moment. There's still something physiologically that can happen with the athletes with high performance-based identity.
That's so interesting because you, like, as an athlete, as a high level athlete myself, like, I know I do like some adrenaline. I like the nerves. I like that kind of heightened awareness in the competition or leading right up to it. But yeah, if you're doing it weeks before, you're just going to be completely wiped out because, like, once your adrenaline's gone, I mean, you're left with nothing. So yeah. I can imagine the toll that would take on you physically as well as mentally.
Right. I mean, and I think most high-level athletes know that feeling of like, kind of thinking about a competition and beginning to feel yourself getting amped and saying, "Oh, not yet." I can't. I gotta regulate this right now. And so, but I also think there's some, the other things that you can see and think about with performance-based identity is it's not always conscious either. Is that we anticipate threats often in our mind that become a part of how we see the world, and sometimes we're not even aware of it. And so we might not even be aware that our stress hormones are high and we're stressed, and because that's the way the body works. And then once you kind of reach this allostatic load of stress, it can be really hard to bounce back from that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, I had seen, you've written kind of some warning signs of performance-based identity that I'll just kind of list, because I guess if you're not aware, like, these warning signs are maybe a great way to see if you are kind of in that zone, right? So we have them, let's see, you have one, sports are not fun anymore. That might be like a warning sign of performance-based identity. Another one is fear of failure is stronger than the excitement to compete. Anxiety increases before the competition, even including like sleep disruption. Bouncing back from a disappointing performance is difficult. Maybe there's a desire to quit or find excuses just not even to compete. Self-descriptions only relate to being an athlete. You only see yourself as an athlete, not somebody separate from your sport. Also have feelings of worthlessness when not performing well. You might ruminate on mistakes made in competition, like you can't let go of them. Jealousy or anger is demonstrated towards others performing better than you. And also an obsession develops with working harder, practicing more, just like you mentioned earlier. So I guess if you're not even aware, like if you're starting to see some of those signs, like you may kind of want to get yourself in check, right?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's I think as a you could speak to this, Laura, in a lot of ways, but as a professional elite athlete, there's some of these warning signs that are really, really hard. I mean, sports is, I think even it's more like the first one, as far as sports is not fun anymore. It's not always fun to work hard. You know that. I mean, it's not there. So I think even a better, or to go deeper in that thought is that there's a loss of joy for the sport, that the very thing that really attracted you to that I often will have athletes stop and remember and think about that time where they started that sport, and take them back to that time of being a child, of standing maybe on the diving board for the first time, or whatever it was about diving that attracted you to it, and or whether it's running, whatever it is, and really have them imagine themselves back in that scenario. What was the feelings? What were the sensations? What were the things that really made this attractive? Because that's what's often lost, is that the gift and the joy of the sport becomes a burden, and we don't function near as well off of negative emotion as we do in these more positive emotional states. And so there are times that negative emotions can help us and facilitate some progress. But overall, that joy state of being able to really connect to what's meaningful and is really critical to being able to perform without getting in your own way,
yeah.
I guess, and so that I think these times really are things that kind of point to you and say, okay, I need to maybe take a look at this and think about what is the source of my motivation, and is there a way to find other more healthy motivation that can also help me be the best that I can possibly be.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I think it's important to point out, these are for every level of athlete can experience this, from very, kind of beginner, young teenage athlete up until, the top of the top. Like we pointed out, Michael Phelps went in rehab after a DUI, and he kind of had a summary based on his performance-based identity. And I'll quote it here. He said, "I wound up uncovering a lot of things about myself. For a long time, I saw myself as an athlete as the athlete that I was, but not as a human being." So nobody's really above this. Everybody can kind of be susceptible. And I think sometimes we kind of go in and out of it. You've said any high achiever with a performance-based identity risk can feel devastated when they fall short of their goals, or having actually even realized their dream, then finding it empty. So I guess the big question is, okay, maybe we recognize that we have that performance-based identity, or we deal with that sometimes. How do you change it?
Yeah. It's the first thing I would say when we talk about changing performance-based identity is that it's always going to be a process for a high achiever. There's always going to be elements and times in life where we'll experience this kind of performance-based identity. I think it's beginning to shift it so that it's more that your identity and worth begins to become centered around something more meaningful in your life. The motivation is drawing from something deeper than just winning medals or proving your worth and value. That this is really what we talk about when we talk about purpose, is that purpose is a powerful motivator that organizes our sense of identity around what we value the most. Mm-hmm. And so purpose is a great anecdote when we talk about this, because purpose involves really three things. The first thing purpose involves is to be doing something that is personally meaningful to you. The second thing is that it's having a goal or an aim that you're moving towards. So both of those are very easy in sport to kind of capture. Mm-hmm. But the third piece is really important. And this piece is that you're connected to something that is greater than yourself, that makes a contribution to this world. One of the things that we've seen in the research is that people who have these three parts of purpose, there's something about giving to others. There's something about doing something beyond yourself and connecting to something meaningful beyond yourself that really is stabilizing in our sense of identity. It gives us a sense of, it starts with us really understanding our own sense of worth and value. Mm-hmm. It's hard to create values if you don't feel like you're a person of value. Mm-hmm. And I think that becomes really key. And purpose is a way to begin to help form our sense of worth and identity in something that's much more foundational than just performance. And so we found that this purpose-based identity that involves this self-worth and value, that I understand my self-worth and value outside of just sports, as well as this purpose and even a view of myself in the future after sport, that these athletes also were just as accomplished, and their performance was just as high. There was no difference in our athletes that were in this performance-based versus purpose-based identity. But they by far, emotionally, psychologically, and the way they viewed competition and the way they bounced back from competition, were much superior than the performance-based identity athletes. They were able to identify and turn to other people and relationships for emotional support and in ways that was helpful for them. They had higher levels of life satisfaction, feeling good about their life. They were able to regulate their emotions better. There's a great emotion regulation strategy that's really important called reappraisal, and we can kind of redefine or reframe a negative situation in a way that allows us to overcome it, that allows us to not be hijacked emotionally by it. And so the purpose-based identity athletes were able to do that better. They saw competition as a challenge. They embraced the opportunity to become better. And so that to me is really what I think is the shift. It's shifting from this performance-based identity to purpose-based identity, but there's always going to be a flux there that we have to be aware of and know and become aware of when we're going kind of more towards the performance-based identity side of saying, okay, how do I get back to purpose and understanding that and let that motivate me? Because sports is the nature of sports and high achievement. You have to work hard. You have to make lots of sacrifices. You want to be able to push yourself beyond what you ever thought you could. Those are all healthy pursuits. Mm-hmm. But what drives it really matters. And that's the part that's going to impact your emotional and relational health.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's going to keep you going when things get tough too, for sure. Now,
absolutely.
Question. So if people are finding that they're kind of performance-based and they're struggling with that, but they're recognizing it, they want to become more purpose-based, but you say relationships are really important for that. Like, what if they're a little isolated, like they don't have a lot of supportive people around them? Like, what can they do to get past that and get through that and find that purpose?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's often a result of this performance-based identity is this, not even that it's on purpose, but this isolation from meaningful relationships. And so I think the reason why relationships are so powerful, healthy relationships are so powerful, is because they remind you that you are of worth and value. They remind you of your uniqueness, of that somebody cares about you deeply, not just for what you can do for them, but because of who you are. And so when I work with athletes, one of the first steps that I do is really try to help them engage in the people around them. Often there is somebody around them that they've had a meaningful relationship with in a healthy way that maybe they need to reconnect with and be reminded of. A really simple task to do this is I had one athlete who I had her give her people that she knew around her that cared about her, and to give them little sheets of paper that they were supposed to write something, how they saw her, how would they describe her, mm-hmm. and then they were to fold them up, tape them, and she wasn't supposed to look at them until they brought them back, and then I kind of did this mindful activity with her, and just which is really just kind of giving her space to focus on her breathing and being present. And then I read these statements to her, knowing that these were all people who cared about her. And the statements that were being read about her were so different than how she saw herself when it came to the more negative things. So it was challenging her negative self-talk through the voice of meaningful relationships. And I think that was really powerful for her. Now the goal was to get her to start to internalize that voice for herself. Mm-hmm. But relationships are powerful because it reminds us of our worth and value. We do better when we're connected. We face challenge better. We deal with pain better. There's lots of great research to show this. And so the relationships become really a foundation for helping people begin to shift from a performance-based identity, giving them a sense of worth that helps them now start to think about what is my kind of meaning and purpose, and what can I begin to do differently in practice every day, whether it's learning to the practice of gratitude or generosity of doing things for other people, or challenging negative self-talk, that begin over time to create habits that become a part of our identity.
So powerful. So many good takeaways here. Now, if with all of this good information, thinking of the athletes and maybe where they might be, if they could take away one thing they should do today that would help them move more toward that purpose-based identity, what would you suggest?
I think the thing that I think is often most powerful is to have athletes reflect on what is meaningful in their life, because often people will be able to talk about what's meaningful in their life, but they actually don't connect that to their athletic pursuit. They often kind of keep them separate. But when you get somebody that talks about things like their family, that their family that's a value for them, is their relationship with their family. Well, why is that a value for you? What is it about that's a value? And it's that, it's this connection and this love and this loyalty. And you start to see these. So the first thing I would say is sit down and write down what is meaningful to you. What do you value? What are the things that you value about yourself, or the things that you see as important values in your life? And then next to it, really write down, how are you living in that every day? Like, what is your current life patterns and habits that then would be consistent with those things that you say you value, and just taking stock of that. And often with performance-based identity, what you'll find is what's meaningful and valued at a deep level. There might be things on that list like winning gold medals, breaking records, those things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But if that's the only dominant values in someone's life, that's where it gets challenging. And so thinking and pushing yourself to not just think about athletic value or goals or pursuits, but beginning to think about what is it in life that brings most meaning to you and fulfillment to you. And then how are you living in that every day? That can be an honest assessment of where you're at. I think that's important. I would say the other thing that I would say is don't wait till you feel like making the shift. This is maybe a plug for Hope Sports, but go do. I mean, the power of going to build with Hope Sports is that you're doing something for the other, and then you can start to really reflect on why is that meaningful to you, and if you can't make it to the build, do it. Find some things that are meaningful to you in your neighborhood, in your community, and recognize that this isn't just good PR to go do good for others. That when you do good for others, that's just as important for your transformation of your own identity. And I think that starts to give you a taste of what purpose is, what's possible with purpose. And once you get a taste of what's possible with purpose, you will continue to go after it.
Yes,
because it brings fulfillment in a different way.
And then that's going to move you past sport too, because if you have an injury and you have to retire, or if it's time to move on, like what is going to be in your life and how do you focus and move on if you've always just been performance-based? You have to know, like you said, what your value is and the value in others, and you have to have that purpose beyond your sport to really kind of be successful at life too. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Sure.
And that's a reality that I think can be really difficult to face for a lot of athletes. When they're done competing, what now?
Exactly.
And for some athletes, that's at 21. For some, that's 24, 25. Some sports go all the way up into later in life, in 40s and even 50s. But there's still a time where you finish and you have to say, okay, how do I what do I start to put my time and energy in now that's meaningful? And I think if you can start that as an athlete, it's such a good foundation for that transition.
Mm-hmm. And just for those of you who may not be aware of what Hope Sports is, this is the Hope Sports podcast from an amazing organization called Hope Sports that brings athletes together to come down to Mexico and impoverished countries to build homes for the poor. And not only are you making a difference for a family that does not have a roof over their heads or does not have a solid foundation to stand on, but you also are impacted in just amazingly dramatic ways and all the people around you. It's such an incredible experience. And like Ben said, it's a great way to find value and purpose outside of yourself if you don't know how to do that. It is an amazing way to start. And you can go check out hopesports.org to learn more about that organization, that amazing organization that is sponsoring this podcast. So, Ben, you are amazing and inspiring us all to go beyond our sport and find purpose in our sport, through our sport, in our lives. Where can we find you on the interwebs so that we can follow you and continue to get all this valuable information?
You can find me on the website. I work at a research center called the Thrive Center for Human Development. That's at thethrivecenter.org. You can also follow me on my social media. I'm on Instagram. And also just started on Twitter. So trying to gain, add more to Twitter because I'm getting better at it.
Valuable insights in 140 characters or less. There you go.
Right. Seriously. It's like a whole nother language for me. So, and then I'm on Facebook too. And it's just Ben Holtberg. You can find me on any of those social media sites. So I'm trying to continue to put more resource out there for athletes and because this is my purpose. This is what I feel passionate about. It gives meaning to my life. And so feel free to reach out to me if you want more information. And there's lots of articles and readings on the Thrive Center website.
Awesome. I feel like that's so poetic. Your purpose is to give other people purpose. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. Ben, thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate having you.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you so much to Ben for joining us on today's episode. There was just so much good insight in that conversation. I was especially struck by the connection between our identity mindset and the physiological response we have to fear. When we fear losing more than we find joy in participating, we begin to treat our sport as a threat rather than a passion, even if we aren't fully aware of it. It's fascinating how just a shift of mindset can have such a powerful effect on your emotional health and your physical performance. If you want to discover even more ways to pursue purpose in your everyday life, then be sure to follow Ben at all the links in the show notes. On the next episode of the Hope Sports podcast, we'll be joined by two-time Olympic gold medalist fencer Mariel Zagunis. You are not going to want to miss that episode. So make sure to subscribe to the Hope Sports podcast to get all of the latest episodes. And please leave us a review because those reviews will help us continue to get these amazing guests on the show. I'm Laura Wilkinson. Thanks again for listening. This podcast is produced by Evo Terra and Simpler Media. For more information on Hope Sports and to access the complete archives, please visit hopesports.org.